story, but our story in the United States of America. And so as we think of what Hebrew slave is the 4th of July from 1852, that magnificent speech by Frederick Douglass, the great emancipator, as we think about the founding documents, our Declaration of Independence, in which the indigenous peoples, our brothers and sisters, were labeled savages. As we think of the removal acts, as we think of so much of their story that we don't know, that is left untold. We're very grateful to you, Reverend Jesse Jackson, for bringing us all to have this discussion. And so, let us move forward. We have a marvelous panel today, Reverend Jackson. Of course, I see my brother in radio and in communications, Mark Thompson. So glad that you are here today. Reverend Mark Charles Thompson, who is also an ordained minister, and Shelley Davis is our national political director. And with your permission, I would like to introduce the panel and then, of course, toss it to Reverend Jesse Jackson.
By all means.
We are joined, I see, by, is it Alethea Wells, Esquire? So honored to have her today. Reverend Dr. Todd Urey, who's our Senior Vice President. Milan Patton, University of Chicago student, one of our youth directors, so excited to have him. One of the leading, probably the leading voting advocate in the field of law in the United States today. Attorney Barbara Online, former executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law, an organization founded by John F. Kennedy to defend just that, and she has gone on to found the Transformative Justice Coalition. We have David Sickey. We're so excited that you're with us today. Thank you so much, our dear brother. And Chief Hospital, may God bless you today on this Independence Day. And Reverend Jesse Jackson, I'd like to, of course, start with you, Reverend Jackson. Reverend Jackson, oftentimes we hear, I'm so glad that you're bringing us together on this Independence Day as we looked at President Trump at Mount Rushmore yesterday. Many people we saw, if you looked at certain news channels, Mark Thompson, we saw a very rosy picture. But many people don't know that he faced a good many protesters getting up to Mount Rushmore yesterday because indigenous people said that this is a desecration. And yet, thousands of people persisted and insisted that they be at that event. Why did you want to tell the indigenous people story today, Reverend Jackson?
Good morning, so to the panel. You shall know the truth, and truth shall set you free. I often say that America's biggest sin of slavery is not true. Biggest sin is genocide against the Native American population. Man was born in the sin of slavery, shaping the iniquity of white male supremacy. This was the root of it all. I want to thank Chief Hoskins, who is now a member of the Rainbow Pictures Board, as we seek to align ourselves with the indigenous population. 572 tribes of Native Americans across America. And because of the massive wipeout, that so few of them, they're highly great politically, but they're great morally, all high ground. Concerned that we know Tallahassee, Indian tribal name, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Seattle, Indian tribal name. We want to learn about this part of the history. So we have some need, the Rainbow Push Coalition, to in fact involve the Americans as real members of this family. The issues are issues. Their treaties valid, our treaties valid. We can fight with them. Treaties on it. Last night, Mount Rushmore simply was stealing property, confiscated property. We started it now. We usually thought to get the Redskins named the Washington football team. Not to happen now as Black Lives Matter escalates. In fact, the Cowboys said that the Indians scalped the whites. The fact of the matter is, when they had 1832, they were good Indians, a dead Indian. It was the removal of American Indians. If you brought an Indian trading block, the paid for dead Indian, for a male, a little more, female, children, can't make any vision. Well, let's sell scalps. Black people scalping it, sold the scalps. Men and children, we must know the ugly history of this. But today is the day to bring it about for a time because man was born in the sin of slavery, should be the iniquity of racial white male supremacy. And as we now begin to pull down statues of Confederates, treasonous soldiers, that's now on earth, truth of our foundation, the nation conceived liberty and slavery coexisting. It's a contradiction we cannot stand any longer. We will bring the name down on this here from Washington football team. But we will also get a commitment to honor trees. When I look at the Navajos dying, the biggest number dying in the COVID-19, sickens me that we cannot be dismissive of Native Americans dying without water, dying without hospital sources. Today we're getting married again. We're getting married to our Native brothers. Hopkins, this is our time. We're going to do it now. Reverend who is our Washington Bureau Chief and Vice President, has not said about this. Somehow rich with the Cherokee, South Carolina. My father's parents were in Clark, Cherokee, Clark, Ethiopia. We are all entangled with the Native American population. We're them and they're us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson. This is what we're going to do. I'd like to get some words from Reverend Dr. Todd Geary, our Senior Vice President at Rainbow Push, and I'm going to hear from you, Reverend Mark Thompson. Esteemed, you're in radio, you're in television, you're really everywhere, and he's also someone who's an organizer and activist. And then I'm going to bring spread the conversation out through our esteemed panel. Starting with you, Reverend Dr. Geary, your thoughts today?
Well, good morning, Santita, Reverend Jackson, and to all of our friends who are on the call. This is such an important conversation against the backdrop, as you have lifted up, about the debacle at Mount Rushmore, with all of the conflicted symbolism, but the very clear rhetoric that was coming out of the mouth of the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You can hear the incitement to hatred in the words that were chosen on the eve of the day when we tell the fairy tale of independence. As we tell the untold story, it helps us to put in proper perspective what the nation often holds on to as the epitome of its story. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a truth to be self-evident, but not realized by all people, and so the contradiction is not only in the rhetoric, but that which has flowed from it. And so this conversation helps us to begin to correct the telling of the story, to begin to understand the unique nuances, to make sure that we walk in self-evident but clearly told truth. And so I'm glad to have our Native American brothers and sisters. I thank Licia Maddox for being my sister from another mister to help kind of do the coordination. She is a great colleague working on behalf of the National Congress of American Indians. And so we've got great work to do together. Santita, I'm putting my seatbelt on, ready to go for a good ride today. As my big brother Mark Thompson would say, happy 4th of their live day. All right, let's get it straight. Let's get to the conversation. Thank you.
Reverend Thompson?
Well, of course, happy 4th of their lives, and always an honor to be with all of my comrades here in the struggle, and especially Reverend Jackson, who throughout his career has never forsaken the Native American story and has never minimized it. I think it's important for those of us as African Americans to do that. All of us who knew and respected and loved the great scholar, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who wrote the book They Came Before Columbus. Our African ancestors arrived on these shores. A black explorer from Mali by the name of Abubakari was here in the 1300s before Columbus, establishing trade and relations harmoniously with the indigenous Native American people here in this country. So we're thankful to Reverend Jackson. Thank you to Dr. Uri. Thank you to Shelley Davis for his great organizing as always. And thank you to Santita with that bad necklace you have on today. Amen. Let me just say, as we look at Mount Rushmore, and this has been an opportunity for people to learn about the true history of that space and it belonging to the Native Americans, that is sacred space. It is more urgent that we have these conversations. And one more thing I'll say, when we look at Trump today and his invocation of the Confederacy, we have to wonder whether that's not some false patriotism as a cover for him being complicit in Russian bounty hunting of today's U.S. troops. So don't love the Confederacy and then be silent about the bounties that are on U.S. troops right now in Afghanistan. So I thank you all. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the discussion. Thankful that all the companies are withdrawing from the Washington football team. That name must change, as should the Braves, as should the Cleveland Indians, as should, I'm sorry, Santita, I know it's your team, the Blackhawks in Chicago, all of the Florida State Seminoles, all of these names must change. And I lift up the name also of Reverend Jackson's dear friend and mine, Vernon Bellecourt, of the Native American community, Wabunini, as we called him. Lift him up as an ancestor.
As we go around, Mark, actually they're all our teams. They're America's teams. So they belong to you, me, and everybody here. But that's why we have an obligation as Americans to change all of this. The Blackhawks, the Indians, on and on and on. These are teams that we have celebrated. And most of us have done that in ignorance. And so we go to you, Chief Hoskins, to really kick things off. So that you can let us know that you could reframe Independence Day, July 4th, 1770. These founding documents in this country, of course, had African American men as 3/5 human. They did not. Black women did not even count. Women of any color didn't count. But in the founding documents as well, indigenous peoples were labeled, were characterized as savages. How should we look at today, and if you could tie that into what happened in Mount Rushmore last night?
Well, I appreciate that, and Reverend Jackson and everyone, it's just an honor to be on the program this morning. I think that the experience that I've had in my life is in some ways the same experience people all over the country have, which I was raised not knowing about those fine details in some of the founding documents that would refer to Native Americans as savages. It wouldn't be until I was a young adult that I would encounter that. And I think what that reflects is that we're a country that glosses over or completely ignores parts of history that's uncomfortable. And goodness knows there's so many chapters of American history that are uncomfortable. Many that are great, but many that are uncomfortable for Americans to talk about. But we have to talk about it. So I think that it's great that today we can talk about some of those difficult chapters. Yesterday the Washington Redskins, under pressure from corporate sponsors, started to do the right thing. I was talking to my daughter about that. She was aware that Nike, was going to put some pressure on the Redskins, but I said, Nike doesn't do that if people don't raise their voices. And even though it's taken generations of raising people's voices, we had some results yesterday. So I want my daughter to feel encouraged about the future, and I think yesterday was a way to do that. But I'll tell you what was discouraging for her and me and my wife was the coverage of the protesters yesterday as the president went to the Black Hills, sacred for the Lakota people. The coverage really across mainstream media just wasn't there. We really had to go, on Facebook to see some live feeds to see what was going on. And I think that tells us that we still have a long way to go in the country in terms of telling this story. That's why I love the name of today's program, The Untold Story, because it's untold in terms of the history, me growing up not knowing those aspects of my own people. perhaps being referred to as savages. And it's untold today in terms of a day in which the President of the United States goes to the Black Hills, and yet the story of the history of that and the current protests are marginalized. And I think we have to work to change that. And I think engaging with the Rainbow Coalition is one way we can do that.
Thank you so much for being with us today and your immediate reaction to what happened last night at Mount Rushmore. I mean, when you saw the fireworks display, I mean, from my readings of the news, indigenous peoples, the nations said, please, the fireworks, this is just such an insult over these sacred lands. This is something that most Americans and most people who are tuning into us today do not know, and we encourage you to like and share this. That Barbara Online, who's so magnificent on social media, Milan Patton, and Reverend Mark Thompson, and everyone here, please like and share. Let's get this out into the networks, because we want people to hear from Richard Austin and meet David Sickey, because we need to know. Most of us don't know, because African Americans, we're just finding out our history too.
Well, I think what I felt was some hurt yesterday evening, and some hurt and compassion for my Lakota brothers and sisters for whom that area, the Black Hills, are sacred. And the great history of it being stolen from them is still ever present in their minds. And they are feeling today, this isn't just a chapter in history, but they are feeling today the impact of that, both economically, culturally, socially. It's still with them today. You know, the President of the United States, I think reasonably we would expect the President to be somewhere in the country engaged in some sort of memorialization this weekend. I think we just would. The President of the United States could have been a million places yesterday. He could have done a million things. He chose to go to a place where the native peoples who were here before there was a United States asked him not to come. And there's great strife going on in the country. We need some leadership that will bring us together and heal. I think yesterday did the opposite. And so I wish the President would have made a different choice, because for the Lakota people and for Native peoples all over the country, what happened yesterday was not lost on them. Celebrating in that manner, and really the tone of that speech. Honestly, I said he could be a million places and do a million things, but that speech anywhere, I think, was jarring to hear, just as an American, certainly as a Native American.
David Sickey,
Thank you.
great state of Louisiana. Yes, Reverend Jackson.
The attempt to do Juneteenth speech in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Calculation. Those who Black Hills of South Dakota. All of that turning people against blacks and Native Americans. That's why our coalition is so significant. We like a number we pick up in moral authority. It's significant to do so forever. What's going on when Native Americans on attack? We will be with you. We were Standing Rock 2 years ago, some people. We were together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Sickey from the Louisiana, I want to pronounce this correctly, is it the Coshawta Nation?
It's Coshawta tribe of Louisiana.
Okay, we need you to turn up just a little bit, sir. I can hear you, yes.
Okay, is that helping out a little bit?
Just a little bit. If you could come just a little closer, because we absolutely need to hear everything that you have to say, sir.
Okay, great. Can you, does that help a little?
Perfect. Yes, sir, that helps a lot.
Good morning.
The Untold Story. The Rainbow Push Coalition is bringing together the Untold Story. You can react to what happened at Mount Rushmore last night, but what don't we know? There's so much that we don't know.
Absolutely. Good morning again from the great state of Louisiana and from the sovereign nation of the Coshawta. We are located in southwest Louisiana, and we have 966 members in our tribe. And we're very, very proud, and we consider it a privilege and an honor to join you all this morning, including Reverend Jackson, who is an icon here in the country. Who's been a leader for several decades in social justice and civil rights and so forth. It's an incredible privilege to be here this morning. As you know, the story of Indian law and policy here in the United States is tumultuous, and for lack of a better word, unbelievable. And it's in the context and the background of what's happening in this country. We're facing unprecedented challenges and crises. It's very appropriate that we have these types of discussions. And again, some of our panelists mentioned that these are sometimes uncomfortable topics to discuss. But just because it's uncomfortable and unpleasant, it doesn't mean that we should hide them or sweep them under the rug or try to wish them away. This is a part of American history, whether it's good or bad. And so again, let's put forth all of the topics and the things that have occurred since the founding of this country. And as you know, Native Americans became official citizens only in 1924, which is relatively a short time ago, relatively speaking. And
Excuse me, Mr. Sicky, could you repeat that for our listening audience? And we want you to like and share this, and please highlight that, everybody. Amplify what you just said. Could you repeat that, please?
Absolutely. As you know, since the founding of America, the indigenous people inhabited North America for thousands of years and centuries. And since the founding of America, of the United States, Native Americans did not become citizens of this country until 1924, which, relatively speaking, is only a short time ago when you think about it. In addition to that, voting rights for Native Americans in every state only occurred in 1962. And I'll be happy to repeat that as well, if you wish.
I'm only asking you, Mr. Sicky, I'm only asking you to repeat this, and Chief Hoskin, because we are at the Rainbow Push Coalition are very sensitive to the fact that we're asking you to share our history with us, your rich history, but it's our collective history. And these are things that we don't know. I know Milan Patton, I'm almost certain, University of Chicago student, one of the top universities in the world. Just nod or affirm yes or no. Did you know that Native Americans, indigenous peoples, were not citizens until 1924?
This is something.
Okay, because you're sitting a little close to Reverend Jackson. You have to move you over. And just if you could affirm or deny this, I mean, Attorney Arnwine, did you know? And you probably did.
I'm saying this is something.
She reads the law books. But please give us that so that we can carry this forward today. Mr. Sicky, on Independence Day, you have been citizens 96 years, not even 100 years.
Absolutely, and it's remarkable. Another fact is that Native Americans have been, to this day, have on a per capita basis, enroll and enlist in the United States Armed Forces voluntarily. We have the highest rate of any segment of society of Native Americans volunteering for this nation's armed forces, which means, in other words, that despite what has been done to our tribal nations and tribal people in this country, our people continue to serve proudly for the defense and the spread of freedom, not only here in America, but around the globe as well. And I'm very, very proud of that fact.
That was the question that they were asked on C-SPAN this morning. They asked the American public, are you proud to be an American? And you're very proud. And yet African Americans are proud too. How do you manage to be proud when you've had so much exclusion and quite frankly, genocide?
Again, Ms. Jackson, you brought up a great point this morning that African Americans are still learning about your own history, which I'm very thankful that you're very forthcoming about that. Even in my own Native American culture and among our people, there's so much to be learned about our own history as well. And the most important fact for any group here in America is that know your history, study your history, know the facts, but at the same time, do not be paralyzed by history. Be a good student of history. Learn from it and apply the best practices and take what's good out of that history and create a better society for your communities and your jurisdictions and in our entire country going forward. So again, the idea is to, again, not be paralyzed and live in history. but to take what was done to us and to learn from it and to apply best practices and enhance your communities back home, wherever they may be.
Can't do that.
Yes, Reverend.
You know, they're speaking about it, the many people government to do it. Trump's going to Tulsa on the day of Juneteenth. People know about Juneteenth who never went before.
Right.
He's going to Mount Rushmore, a lesson taught we never knew before. So even these negative experiences will turn into positives.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think what we're dealing with a community of interest, and we're standing this morning with our African American brothers and sisters this morning, and we as Native Americans have a community of interest with you. And, we're forcing America to confront two great original sins of America,
Right.
which the Reverend eloquently put this morning during our introduction: the genocide of its native people and the slavery of African Americans. And here we are celebrating today, July 4th, the independence of our country. And yet, it's interesting to note that, even in a literal sense, this country's a democracy was founded in North America on the bedrock and on the very foundation and on the lands of this nation's indigenous peoples and communities. And as you know, again, like I referenced this morning, Native American policy and law here in America has been tumultuous. And even to this day, and Chief Hoskin, you can comment on this as well, there's still a lot of unknowns. We have come so far as a nation and as tribal nations that exist here in America, and yet we have so much more work to do.
Chief Hoskin?
That's certainly true. I think historical perspective is important, and there's been mention of citizenship since the 1920s and the right to vote since the 1960s. The other thing we have to remember is for most of the 20th century, our tribal governments were not allowed by the government of the United States to function in a meaningful way, to exercise sovereignty. For the Cherokee Nation, it's been since the 1970s, which is a relatively short period of time. And it's true across Indian country that you see tribes, when they've been getting back on their feet in terms of governing themselves, fairly short period of time, we have come a long way. But in terms of economic advancement, in terms of opportunities for our people, I think that's an important part of history for people to remember. It's true, people need to know that tribes were here since before the founding of the country. That's what I want every child in America to grow up learning. But I think also understanding that a couple of centuries, a few centuries of oppression and dispossession and dismantling of governments and divvying up of land and the imposition of states like the state of Oklahoma over tribal lands has had such a lasting impact. And so some people will say, well, why do the tribes still need assistance from the government of the United States? Well, it's a trust responsibility. It's born of treaties and federal law, and it reflects the United States needing to make good on centuries, again, of oppression and dispossession. So it is true we have a long ways to go.
We learn much about African history from the Tarzan and movies. We learn from the cowboy pictures, which is the way that how we distorted our views of ourselves. The movie we put in for the cowboys, and we put in for Tarzan. On earth, and when we come into it, we would pull in for cowboy to kill Indian. Tarzan and Jane and Boy to wipe out the Africans. So part of our coming unto ourselves to tell you help us understand Barbara.
Yes.
We're overcoming the distortion we've been taught.
That's right. Attorney Barbara online, Transformative Justice Coalition, I would like you to react to, well, this untold story and what you've heard from David Sickey and Chief Hoskin. I mean, they're giving us so much information that many of us they have not had.
I am just so honored to be part of this panel. Thank you, Chief. Thank you so much for everything, and Reverend, for having this focus today. I mean, there's so much history, right? I mean, truth-telling is everything. And people never want to talk about the fact that the United States is a white settler nation. There's implications to using those words. A white settler nation. It wasn't just a nation of immigrants. That's a real falsehood to start there, because it was a settler nation. It was a nation that was founded by people who profoundly were determined to take the land by theft. And let's be very clear that this is a country founded on two principles: theft and murder. Theft of land, bodies, labor, sex, talents. You can just go through all of the thievery that was necessary to, quote, build the U.S. in a settler's mind. You got to remember who the settlers were. These were not the cream of the crop of European society. These were people who were given options that either they would be imprisoned or they would go and work in the United States, sometimes under indenture. They were second and third sons under primogeniture. They were not able to inherit, and they were wards of their families, so they needed some other way to have wealth and to have independence. And so they left because they would never be the inheritors of their family's wealth. They were religious outcasts, people who were persecuted in their land because of their religious beliefs. So they came here with a lot of resentment and anger. We got to be clear about who came to this country and why it was easy for them to engage in the theft, the massacres. Because let's be clear, 25 million Native Americans lived in the United States at the time that the European settlers came here. Now we have a maximum number. It's estimated, I don't know, the population numbers never make sense, but they say about 5 million. If you take the entire swath of Native American populations. So that means 20 million people gone, not just, quote, disappeared, massacred. You got to understand, the slavery. That's why it was easy for them to engage in the brutality, the inhumanity of slavery, and to call people subhuman. My goodness. So we have to look at this founding. Truth-telling is so key, because without it, it makes zero sense. We got to look at the guy who created Mount Rushmore. We've been talking about Mount Rushmore. Guess what? He was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, everybody. The money that he got to build Stone Mountain came from the Ku Klux Klan. He was a racist to his soul. And we don't understand that he was close to the head of the Grand Dragon of the Klan when he built Mount Rushmore. He built Stone Mountain. He started it, and he got fired because of some differences with them after 10 years of working on the project. I mean, people gotta, understand this past and how, our history. But there's so much hidden history, right? The very model for the federal government comes from Native Americans. It was built on the Federation of the Native American nations. That's how we have a, quote, federation government, a government that has both a state-centric mentality and at the same time a federal government mentality. That's not a European model. That came out of Native American government and governance. So there's so much we just don't know. I just want to end, I'll come back and do voting rights, but I want to end on this intro by also saying that people, we're in this movement right now because of the terrific and horrific death of George Floyd. And we talk about Black Lives Matter, but let's be very clear. The number one population disproportionately killed by police in the country are Native Americans. So I just want to stop there. There's so much history. Like many of us, I have African, white, and Native American blood. in my heritage. So, so I have always paid great attention to Native American history because, in part, to some degree, it has always been part of my family history. Thank you.
Thank you. As we await other participants who are going to be on the call with us today, and we are so grateful. I cannot tell you enough, David Sicki and Chief Hoskin, giving us the frame, but we want to hear much more from you because you are here to tell your story today, so much of which we do not know. But there's a young man here, was a young student, an undergraduate student at the University of Chicago. Milan is one of the young leaders in our in the Rainbow Push Coalition, as we are anxious to reach out to our indigenous young people who are younger than us here, who are in school, in high school and college, as we try to get them registered to vote. We're going to come back to you to talk about that, Attorney Barbara Arnwine, because so many Native Americans, so many indigenous peoples were excluded in this 2020 cycle from the vote. They had no access to the vote. Milan, what are you hearing?
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Santita, and congratulations on your 1-year anniversary. I was listening to your radio show yesterday of your show on WCPD, so I wanted to congratulate you on that, and thank you so much, Reverend Jackson, Reverend Wilson, for this opportunity, Shelley, for putting together this amazing, cohort. This is such a significant, not just day, but moment. Just speaking for today's generation, we have a lot to do today beyond the cookouts and fireworks on the 4th of July. We need to speak out about the Lakotas and the history. So grateful we have community leaders here today. What else can we do? What else do we need to be doing in this time of shining the light yet again and again on the injustice and inequities in this country? Chief Hoskin, a little bit earlier, I think you touched on a very crucial point that resonates with many of us in this country. Times like this have sort of peeled back the curtain on this nation in both ways, and truths are being brought out to the forefront that we may not have traditionally engaged with in the educational system. For too many, the stories of marginalized folks and communities have steady been untold. But I think this is a time for lamentation for many, but this is a time for hope for many. And I'm so hopeful that in this moment, these stories are not just being told, and this is an amazing title, The Untold Story, but they're going to begin to be listened to and validated, just like traditional stories have. So this is a time of hope and reflection for me.
I see Miss Alethea Shapiro. Alethea Wells Shapiro has joined us. I'm so glad that you're with us. Esquire, excuse me, Madam Attorney. Please, I want you to pick up from what we've been hearing. We've wanted to hear from everybody, but in particular, we've wanted to hear the untold story, a story that we ourselves cannot tell. We're missing today. Because so many, we saw that there were thousands of people. Reverend Jackson, I have to tell you, I was a little taken aback, David Sicki and Chief Hoskin, when I heard the thousands of people roaring their approval as the fireworks were bursting at Mount Rushmore. Yesterday, I said, wow, the insensitivity. Just as if this pain is not there. Madam Attorney?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much for being with us today.
I just want to thank you all for inviting me. I'm here as trying to be a good ally, trying to learn and listen, just like Milan said. I want to hear these stories. I want to learn. I want to share. And I'm learning along for the first time, to be honest. And so I am very, very honored to be on this call with so many amazing people. And I thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and I think that is the humility that we need here, which is why Chief Hoskin and David Sicki, Reverend Mark Thompson, I'd like you to ask Mr. Sicki. I was about to call you Reverend Sicki. That's not what I want to do, David Sicki. But when people have a lot of information and this high calling, I tend to put you in the ministry. Chief Hoskin, pardon me, that's what I do. Being a PK, a preacher's kid, that's what happens to you. Reverend Mark Thompson, you've heard these stories, particularly from David Sicki and from Chief Hoskin. There's so much that we do not know. And yet, with African Americans, the intersection of African American and of the indigenous peoples of this great land, it's so profound. What are we missing today, Reverend Thompson?
Well, can you hear me okay?
It's a little distorted.
Yeah, I don't know. Something's going on with my system.
But if you can just turn that up,
Yeah,
it's just a little distorted.
is this any better?
Just keep speaking so we can hear you, but turn it up,
Okay.
please. We can't hear you now.
Now you're on mute, Mark.
Okay.
I'm on mute. How
Now
about
you're
that?
off. It's a little
Keep
scratchy.
talking.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just keep talking. We'll work it out.
Again, I think that in this moment of reckoning in America, and that's clearly what it is, we have to make sure that it is more than a moment. This news cycle, Santita, is ever changing, and congratulations on your first year anniversary with CPT as well. We move on from one thing to another. But we have to remain in solidarity. And those of us who are African Americans must be in solidarity with our Native sisters and brothers when it comes to these team names, when it comes to recognition of sacred lands. If we're going to seize whatever this moment is, we have to demand all that we deserve, including something being done about Mount Rushmore. We can't cherry pick which monuments to take down, which statues to take down, and then ignore other ones. And I would even say this, as we look, y'all, and I'm never one to bite my tongue, and I'm not trying to just be mean, but I want to draw a historical parallel. It was the European settler colonialists that brought smallpox and other diseases to foster and encourage a genocide of the native peoples. What is it when a leader knows that there's a pandemic that will kill literally thousands, if not millions of people, and does nothing about it, and then wants to uphold statues of Andrew Jackson? What is the difference in a modern context between what those settler colonialists did to those with those diseases and what is happening to our people today? And it is disproportionately, as we know, affecting people of color. If you all don't know this, in Times Square there's something that filmmaker Eugene Jarecki has erected. It's called the Trump Death Clock, and it's a rolling number of the number of deaths every hour as a result of this pandemic. And so we might look at it as one way when he says, or he's been saying, they kind of changed their minds now. Don't wear a mask. It's safe to go outside. We've got to reopen the economy. That's the modern day version of smallpox in the blankets. When they went on Fox News even and said that, and they were talking about white grandmothers and grandfathers may need to be willing to sacrifice their lives for the good of the economy. That is absolutely horrific. And so history does repeat itself. It's repeating itself right now in terms of what the Native American experience was. And all I can say, Santita, is, I'm here to stand in solidarity. We all should stand in solidarity and continue our resolve toward correcting these wrongs and eliminating all forms. Like, for example, Aunt Jemima, that's gone. All these other images are gone. Well, the Cleveland mascot has got, Chief Wahoo's got to go. The Tomahawk Chop in the Atlanta Braves has got to go. So, and I say that as someone who's always admired Hank Aaron. But you see, even we are victimized when that kind of things happen, those kinds of things happen, because those black football players, black baseball players, have to play under those names. And I think it's high time even some of them today, in 2020, said, I'm not going to accept this anymore. All of these names need to change. Not just Washington, but all of them.
Santita,
Yes, Reverend.
truth does not mean the majority population validation. Jesus was a minority, but morally right. In some sense, the Native American population, the morality of their cause trumps bigger numbers of people. That's why we must know more about it. I want Chief Austin to give us some of the famous Indian tribal names. Last week, the Confederate flag came out of Mississippi. It should be a Native American statue. It's named after Mississippi in the Indian tribal name, for example.
Right.
Give us some of those names, Chief Austin.
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of names and a lot of people that ought to be memorialized. You know, Wilma Mankiller is the one that comes to mind for me, not from Mississippi, but the great chief of the Cherokee Nation. A lady that in, I think, the year 2000, or the National Congress of American Indians, made the case that Indian peoples of this country ought to join with the civil rights cause of African Americans. She said that then. And that's something I reflected on lately. There's a lot of, I think, great imagery and depictions of Native peoples that can be done appropriately across the country. And as you pointed out, Reverend Jackson, so many of the place names, particularly in the southeastern part of the United States, come from Indian languages or Indian place names. And I think we can recapture that in this century. And I think that it would be good, not only for us, I think it'll be good for the country, because you know, monuments aren't how you learn history, but monuments are about what you revere. And I think this country, it's a high time it started revering more of the Native peoples that were here before this country was founded.
Tallahassee.
Tallahassee, yes, yes.
Alabama. Kansas.
Absolutely. The name Oklahoma itself is an Indian name. So the country uses our names and then butchers our imagery and caricatures us for centuries, and I think in this century the opposite ought to be true, that we ought to recapture.
Seems
Reverend?
like we have a lot in common. They use our names and they use our talents and they butcher our imagery. I don't know, that sounds awfully familiar to me. Reverend Thompson?
Just want to ask about two more names, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief. I'd also heard, I live in New York. Manhattan, was it not originally called Mannahatta? Is that accurate? That's another name, isn't it?
It's another name, and the Delaware tribe has a history there in New York State, and of course some people remember that they and other Native peoples didn't get a very good deal when supposedly New York and that area was purchased from the Native Americans. You have to remember these are Native peoples that were living on land in common with their fellow tribal members, and the concept of alienating property, selling property, was not something that was part of their culture. And suddenly white settlers come and say, we've got a deal for you. Well, what a deal it was.
And I understand, too, Massachusetts is a derivative of a native name. Someone pronounced it for me once before. I don't want to butcher it, but then Massachusetts as well, as some of these other states' Reverend name, is a derivative of a native name.
Yeah, you can go to the northeastern part of the United States and find many place names, names of rivers, names of communities that are from the native peoples that were there. And yet the young people growing up there don't know that, as they don't know so much of their history.
And Reverend Jackson, I'm sorry.
All the tear down the Confederate lie was also erect monuments for our true past. The Native American history is so rich, and African American history is so rich, and it's one and the same. So my agenda, I want us to marry. And we're the first one of us to directly place the residence on the record. We must marry a history, marry a relationship. We have numbers, and they have numbers, and we don't have a cause. It's a common cause.
David Sickey, there is so much that we do not know. There's so much that we do not know. As I shared earlier, African Americans are unearthing so much of our history. And you've unearthed huge nuggets of history today for us, you and Chief Foster, because we don't realize just how suffused and imbued we are with Native American lands, I have to go all the way back to grammar school. We had, I do not remember which nation she was representing, but at least at our grammar school, they were sensitive enough to bring in indigenous peoples to speak to us. And as they came to speak to us, she said, you have to understand that I welcome you to America, you don't welcome me. And it was a shift in paradigm that was not lost on me, even at 8 or 9. But my parents were fairly sensitive, so.
So again, I mean, the public in 2020 needs to understand that Native Americans are alive and well. Tribal nations are building, for the most part. There's some that are more prosperous than other tribal nations. Let's also remember the fact that some tribal nations have come a long way, and they have carved dynamic, prosperous, dynamic nations in their jurisdictions. But also at the same time, let's remember our other Native American brothers and sisters in tribal communities who are still struggling. And as far as per capita income, labor and employment numbers are in deplorable third world country conditions almost. And so let's not forget those Native American nations who are still struggling out there. But also at the same time, let's applaud those Native nations who have achieved so much against the backdrop of immense, immeasurable odds. And coming back to the issue and topic of mascots and monuments, let's take it as a teachable moment for America. That as a civilized democratic nation, in one of the most prosperous nations on planet Earth, you would think that we would have a better idea of how to go about embracing one another and learning from each other's stories. Because when we learn from each other's stories and histories and just stop to listen to one another, we enrich everyone's lives. We enrich each other's lives, and we create better communities. And so also, let's not forget that tribal nations, such as the Coushatta, for example, are giving back to our communities in more ways than one. For example, prior to COVID, the Coushatta Nation employed 68% of my county. And in addition to that, 4% of our adjacent county of Jefferson Davis Parish. And our total workforce prior to COVID of 2,400 people, over 97.8% were non-Indians. And a small tribe that numbers 966 members here in rural Allen Parish, in Elton, Louisiana, a small tribe numbering less than 1,000 members, is able to employ friends, family, and neighbors from an 18 county or parish region. That's a little bit over a quarter of Louisiana's parishes. So again, there's so much need that needs to be addressed now. And Chief Hoskins can chime in on this. He can add to it if he wishes. But since President Nixon, tribes are now living in the era of self-determination. After the federal government tried many different policies in their treatment towards Native Americans, finally they decided, hey, you know what, let's let the Native Americans decide for themselves what they see will be best suited and in the best interest of their own people. So as of President Nixon's administration, Native American tribes and peoples across this country are living in the era of self-determination. And what makes self-determination in today's world is its recognition that tribal members share cultural and historical ties that are worth protecting. And self-determination allows tribes to cultivate their uniqueness while simultaneously integrating into everyday life of all Americans. And what is
No, please keep going, Mr. Sticky, please,
And
please.
what is special about self-determination is that it is a policy that recognizes that cultural difference is no more or no less than difference, and that difference is such is non-threatening. And self-determination is a policy that is not afraid of difference. On the contrary, self-determination nurtures that difference and allows it to flourish in ways that benefit everyone. Chief Hoskins, I'm sorry.
Chief Secretary, you know, we laugh at mascots. We look down upon parasites. We respect hosts. You'd be seen as a host, rather than a parasite and a mascot. It's so different. That's why, as African Americans take over these cities and states, Mark, it's important that not only we move Jefferson Davis Parish out, but and into the African Americans, but also we are city rec statutes in Native Americans, because that's the true history. But they're not parasites, but hosts. Indeed,
Well, Reverend Jackson, I think you also make the point that as we tear down these monuments, it's not just enough to tear things down, Reverend Thompson and Attorney Arnwine, and Reverend Dr. Yuri, Milan Patton, and Mr. Jones. I'm going to come to you very shortly after I speak with Chief Hoskin. I'd like them to respond to that. It's what we must build, because we are in a teaching moment. Mr. Sticky, we are in a building moment. We're reconstructing. America is a country, an idea, and an ideal that is constantly evolving. It's constantly under reconstruction, if you will.
Jefferson Davis Parish, my.
So my question to Chief Hoskin is, what should, and to you, Mr. Sticky, as we bring down these monuments that are fraught with so much pain, and hopefully put them in museums so we can not forget them, because now a lot of commercials, if you look at them, Attorney Arnwine, they have a desegregated America, Reverend Thompson, an America that never existed. What should we be replacing? You talked about Ms. Mankiller. I mean, who else? We need to know who. We need some new monuments. All people need them. Americans need them.
Well, I think we do need some new monuments, and there are tribal leaders across the country from our past that could be depicted in monument. I think it's important that they be relevant to the place, because part of a Native American monument will be the place, because the place was so important and so sacred. And so Cherokee Nation is in the northeastern part of Oklahoma today, but our original homeland was in the southeastern part of the country. And so there were Cherokees that lived at that part of the country in communities now that don't even understand it when they drive down a street or when they see a place name. So we had a great peacemaker, a beloved woman named Nanyehi, who lived in the southeastern part of the United States, in the Carolinas, what's now the Carolinas, and perhaps that could be something there. But I think the important thing is to ask this question of tribal nations all over the country. They know best who should be there. But here's the other thing I would add. Nike and FedEx applied tremendous pressure to the Redskins to change the name. What I would ask of Nike and FedEx and other corporations is, don't just use your economic might to change a name or to encourage monuments to be changed, but put resources into telling the story. Because tearing down a monument can begin a conversation that will fizzle out soon if it's not enriched with some discussion. And changing the Redskin name is something that will grab attention across the country and around the world, but will fizzle out and be overshadowed by other events unless we seize the moment. So I think I'd like to see the same energy that was put into pressuring the Redskins to change a name, to change perspective in this country. There's enough wealth and might in this country to change how we teach history. We can depict it in statues, but we ought to be depicting it in history books. That's, I think, what we're missing.
Didn't Trail of Tears end up in Oklahoma?
Yes, Reverend, it did. And that's a story that's also not told. Every Native people in this country has a story of dispossession some sort of removal or dispossession. The Trail of Tears, most associated with the Cherokee Nation, not only the Cherokee Nation, that's something that should be memorialized more in this country because it helps tell a story of the larger issue of oppression and dispossession by the larger society towards Native Americans.
Barbara Wine, Trail of Tears and Trail of Blood. Trail of Tears and Trail of Blood, the African Americans being dispossessions sent north. We were the majority of the population in the southern states. It drove us out to 5,000 lynchings, 1880 to 1980. So Trail of Tears went west, and Trail of Blood went north, and Trail of Bloodhounds. So I first saw Chief Hoskins on a C-SPAN television show. In some detail, the scheme of dispossession. And the Trail of Tears was depopulating Native Americans.
Yes.
Trail of Blood, so that even now, Mississippi is 40% African Americans. There were more slaves than there were slave masters. Once there were eight black colonies in South Carolina, for example. So the Trail of Tears going west, Trail of Blood going north, is the same depossession scheme.
Blood and Tears. David Sickey was trying to jump in. Mr. Sickey, I'm sorry, with my apologies to you, Attorney Arnwine, but I wanted him to respond, and then you. And then, of course, we have to get Mr. Jones in, the chair of the Transformative Justice Coalition. I promise you I will. But it's the untold story of the indigenous peoples, and I think that they need to speak today. Amen? I think I can get a collective amen. David Sickey.
Again, Chief Hopkins stated a few points very eloquently, and I think number one, also as Americans, not just Native Americans, but every American across this country, there should be time for pausing and reflecting and regrouping, I think. And I would encourage my own people and our tribal people around the country, and also all Americans, including our wonderful African American friends here this morning, to arm ourselves with knowledge about our history, about the current affairs in our homelands and across the country, and arm ourselves with the right approaches. And I think it's important to remember that we do not wait around for anyone to give you a voice, because nothing can be achieved if you simply just sit around waiting for someone to grant you something. Everyone on this panel and every citizen of America has a powerful voice. You don't have to be an elected official. You don't have to be a leader in your community. Each citizen has a powerful voice that can be deployed and used for beneficial purposes. I think also the idea is to organize. And all of us, the Native Americans, the African Americans, the Jewish people, and all citizens of America have done a wonderful job of organizing. We see it all the time, even to this day. But obviously, there's always room for improvement. I'll be the first one to say that. Organizing is extremely important. And thirdly, you act and execute. You act upon your plans and your ideas and get your issues out there. Be an active citizen. Take part in democracy and in civic duty. Because again, no one will speak for you. And if you wait around for someone to be your voice, it's simply wishful thinking. And as you know, for the most part, wishful thinking sometimes, for the most part, does not move the ball forward. So a perfect example that I'm reminded is Louisiana celebrated its 47th year of federal re-recognition from the United States Interior. As you know, many tribes under President Eisenhower were terminated from government support. And so there was a period since President Eisenhower, there was a dark period in some very challenging times of several decades for the Coushatta, until our elders, led by my father, Ernest Sickey, who was the tribal chairman at the time, succeeded in achieving victory in achieving federal re-recognition for the Coushattas. But if you ask the elders and the pioneers at the time, and if you ask my father, Ernest, how did you do that? How did you found and create a tribal nation in the wilderness of Allen Parish, in Elton of all places, the most rural of rural America? And they will simply tell you in the most humble way possible that they didn't wait around. They did not wait for anyone to come to their rescue. They did it themselves. They spoke up for themselves, and they acted. And so those pioneers, thankfully, as we celebrate our nation's independence, just last week we celebrated our own tribal, re-recognition from the federal government.
How would we know that? If you don't tell us, we will not know that.
I'm having a hard time hearing Reverend Jackson, sir.
Reverend Jackson, you need to speak up, please.
Unless we will not know unless he tells it. We must tell each other our stories. That's my point.
Which is why we're here today.
Thank you so much, Reverend and Ms. Jackson. It's absolutely important that we hear these facts because, like Chief Hoskins mentioned, a lot of Native American history and jewels of Native American history you will simply not find on the front page of the Washington Post, or even in our textbooks, for example. Our 7th and 8th grade textbook in middle school here in Louisiana has about 4 pages committed to Native American history, and it's very abstract and very vague. When the fact is that here, Louisiana has a rich Native American history, in addition to the African American and Cajun history down here. But the fact is that these textbooks here in Louisiana do not teach our middle school students that there are 4 federally recognized tribes here in the state of Louisiana, and that there's approximately 30,000 Native Americans that call themselves Louisianians here in our state. And so again, sometimes as tribal people and tribal leaders, we have to speak for ourselves. Because again, the historical record shows that no one has ever, it's been very rare if it did occur, that if anyone came to our rescue, or if anyone came and drove to Elton, Louisiana and told us, hey, we have an opportunity, we want you to be the first one to take a crack at it. So again, I want you to know that Native Americans still are proudly practicing their culture and holding on to their traditions and embracing their history and learning from it. We're not here in Louisiana. If you drive, and I invite everyone to visit the sovereign nation of the Coshada in Elton, Louisiana. If you visit our tribal nation, you will see firsthand the immense pride that the Coshadas have in their history, traditions, and culture. And it's also a known fact that I'm very proud to report that we are the only Louisiana tribe that has still retained our ancient language of our ancestors and our elders. And if you visit us in Elton, and I extend you a personal invitation, you will be my guest, you will hear the ancient language of my ancestors still being spoken fluently in Elton. That was not taken away from us. That was not beat out of us by force, by anyone, which speaks to the resiliency and the strength of our tribal people.
Mr. Sickey, could you respond to this Facebook viewer who stated that, and you, Chief Hoskins, as well, there's one of our Facebook viewers said that Native Americans only have had religious freedom since 1978. As prior to that, they could be imprisoned for practicing your religious practices.
Well,
there's so many different paths to God. We're not all Baptists, right? What is that old saying? I'm a Baptist, but I'm glad God is not.
Well, there are some Supreme Court case and also a later Religious Freedom Restoration Act that operated to protect the cultural practices which are recognized as religious practices under the law, and there's truth to that, and the oppression could be in the form of what would happen at boarding schools, what would happen to Native Americans who were imprisoned, whereas other inmates would get to practice the faiths that were recognized by mainstream society, but the natives were not. So, it was a long time in coming to have some progress in that regard.
Mr. Sickey, would you like to respond?
Online. Illinois, Indiana, Indian tribal names. It's important that we begin to put them out there because blacks are now beginning to take office in these citizens, if we know that history, we'll begin to build monuments to
Well,
our.
Reverend, that's why Chief Hoskin and Mr. Sickey have said that, we've got to take control, Daryl Jones, of our books.
Yeah.
Attorney Arnwine. Daryl Jones, the chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. We've got to rewrite, or should I say, we should write correctly the history, because our children are being fed untruths, as Reverend Thompson pointed out at the top of this Facebook Live broadcast. Please like and share, everybody. Like and share. And we'd ask our brothers and sisters in the Coshata Nation, Chief Hoskin, we want everyone to like and share, because this is the beginning for so many of us. Daryl Jones, what is your takeaway from this conversation? We're going to begin to close things out shortly.
I think that, thank you. And thank you for the forum and bringing forward the conversation and the discussion. Because without, as Reverend Jackson indicated, without the discussion, people don't learn. And that's what we're about. We're about the whole learning process. It was amazing to hear from, I believe it was David Sickey, that indicated that in Louisiana, that there are only 7 pages committed to Native American history to be told. We know that when we view African American history, I remember the struggle to be able to have, and I came from a predominantly white community and predominantly white school system, the struggle to have the African American curriculum in the school for us to learn it. And we depended so much on our families to teach us that history. And it's almost a replica of what we're hearing now coming from our Native American brothers and sisters, is that their history really is combined, and it's an oral history that goes from family to family, but it's not being taught in the general curriculum. And, so I'm excited to see that they're taking those steps. I'm excited for RPC and TJC and everyone else to work with them in getting that word out and doing all we can to be certain that the brothers and sisters in the Native American community are being heard. One other thing, if I could, Cynthia, one of the statistics that I heard with regards to policing in America is that generally we think that the most worst numbers for killings and policing in America comes from the African American community. From what I understand, that's not so. It's in the Native American community that exists. So there are so many parallels between the African American struggle and the Native American struggle that story needs to be told. People need to understand that this parallelism exists. And so I'm just excited that this forum exists to try to educate people along those lines. And I appreciate all the efforts that are being taken.
Yeah, remember, we escaped to the reservations.
Right.
We are Cherokee. We are Navajo.
Absolutely.
Look at Barbara Unwine's high cheekbones.
Stop.
That's the
Well, indeed, these are things that we've heard about. As we, I do want to ask Attorney Arnwine, and after you, I'd like to go back to, because we're going to begin to close things out, but I do want to find out a couple of things from, and I'd like you to pick up on this too, but Attorney Arnwine, comment? Attorney Arnwine?
Yes. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, you went out for a minute.
I apologize.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you, Attorney Daryl Jones. I am just so delighted, David Siskey, to hear your story about Elton. It is so beautiful, so prideful, so gorgeous, because it's part of what I call our resistance, that no matter what anyone tries to do, that we know our internal dignity, and we have that ability to rise up continually and to assert ourselves. I wanted to talk just a little bit about just 2 things real quickly. And thank you, Chief Hoskins. I'm learning so much, and I'm taking notes, assiduously, because it's always great to learn new aspects of our history. One thing is, I teach law, right? And I teach law students. And one of the things I try to make sure that people understand is how all of the dispossession, all of the theft, all of the murder has been justified by the law. So I teach, the case of Johnson versus McIntosh, the correct way, because I heard it taught totally wrong. And I teach it and I look at the doctrine of discovery and how, the U.S. is the only case in the entire doctrine of our legal lexicon that actually incorporates a European papal, that's from a pope, order called the Doctrine of Discovery, which basically, regulated, the ways in which the various European nations, related to each other as they were, quote, conquering, foreign lands. And it's a doctrine that goes into the, quote, rehabilitation of the rehabilitation of the humanity of Native Americans and Africans. So it's a very important case, and it's the only case that really consolidates within the United States the land ownership that exists for Europeans over Native American lands. It's a powerful case. It's one that we don't teach right in law school. We rarely talk about it. We rarely talk about the contradictions of that case and why that case needs to be overruled. How the Pope still needs to rescind the doctrine of discovery. All of these things. But anyway, going back to the vote. Yes, Reverend.
Expand upon the Pope's discovery and justified all the actions in the rule and all of that.
Indigenous people worldwide have been fighting for years now, for decades, demanding that the Pope rescind the doctrine of discovery. Because the doctrine of discovery has been used not just in the United States, but worldwide to justify the dispossession of Native people and the enslavement of Africans and other nations for the benefit of whites. And basically it's a doctrine of white supremacy based on religious concepts and saying that God divined that whites should have this this jurisdiction, this authority, this domination, this just horrific power over other people. And it says that they're entitled to use the cruelty, the brutality, the inhumanity that is used in order to force these other and subjugate these other people to become Christians and to become no longer heathens and all the rest of it. It's a horrible doctrine and it needs to be rescinded. And once you start rescinding that, and if we overturn Johnson versus McIntosh ever in our legal history, then all the land rights change, all the state rights, everything changes. So there's so much to be said about that part of our legacy that people just don't know, don't study, don't understand. And when we're talking about dismantling white supremacy, dismantling white structural racism, it's key. Those are key elements of it.
Attorney Arnwine, if you will, because land ownership, as the Irish will tell you, is key to wealth in the world. People who own land are the wealthiest people in the world, because you own everything that's underneath that land, which is why the fight for their land ownership is so key. But as we begin to close out, I do not, in this election 2020 cycle, I would like for you to speak briefly. And I want to, of course, Chief Hoskin and David Sickey will be the last people to speak because it's your untold story. What about, and I'd like for them to react as well, to what we saw happen where they live. Being denied the vote because they were outright victims of voter suppression, and we have not had a full-throated Chief Hoskin. David Sickey, we've not had a real discussion about that nationally. We talk about what happens to African Americans, we've seen that. But the things that were done to our Native American brothers and sisters is just shocking.
And it's important to talk about the denial of the vote, and that allegedly in 1923, I believe it is, that Native Americans were, quote, given the right to, vote within the federal system and state system. But the reality is that that was never honored. It was honored in the breach, as we say, because it was never honored. And it was the 1965 Voting Rights Act that changed everything for all people of color in this country. I just want to say that, the fight for the Native American vote is key, critical to 2020. People forget that the Native American vote is the swing vote in several states. Which means it's the determinative vote in several states for everything from federal offices to state offices. And what has been going on is that a number of the Native American rights organizations, legal organizations, have come together and have been systematically suing these states for all of these barriers that they have put up to voters. People say, what are those barriers? I'll give you one good example. Early voting, normally they will have one or two, polling sites available for Native Americans, and those polling sites are what? You got to drive 50 miles or longer to get to those polling sites. We've been suing, saying you got to bring those polling sites home. Why can't they be on the reservations themselves? Why can't they be where the populations of Native Americans live? Language accessibility, honored in the breach, over and over and over again. No language access for Native American communities. People are going crazy over vote by mail, right? Everybody's saying that's the best answer in the world, and not understanding, just like I've been on this show talking about how it's a barrier for African Americans and Latinos and others. It's a huge barrier for Native Americans and people, because Native Americans, again, have been denied because the Postal Service doesn't want to serve some of the reservations and doesn't want to drive 4 to 5 hours to deliver mail on the reservations. They won't even give Native American homes street addresses. And as a consequence, this has had a huge impact on voter ID, where some states have said you got to have an address, and it's had a huge impact on vote by mail, because you're not getting any mail delivered to your home. So you got to have a post office box, and that's insecure, and there's all these problems. So Native American communities have been doing what David Siskey said. They've been coming together and not only suing, but they've also been creating addresses, doing a whole lot of things to get around these barriers. So many other barriers I can talk about, but those are the big ones right now. And I just want to, give credit to the Native American Rights Fund and all the other great organizations, including NCAI, that are out there suing for these rights.
Well, we are trying to close out, but David Siskey, these are not your closing remarks yet, but you were nodding your head vigorously in affirmation of what Attorney Arnwine was saying. David Siskey, your response, please.
There's some great examples that Ms. Barbara so passionately and eloquently put. For example, one example comes to mind, the recent cases in the Plains area with voter rights and having access to polling places and voting places, precincts. For example, a Native American mother simply cannot get in her car and drive 2-3 hours to go vote, because she may have children that there's no daycare facilities for her to place her children in, her native children in, to go vote. And in certain cases, that person may not even have a vehicle to drive 2-3 hours to go vote, and much less any money to put gas in her vehicle to go vote. So again, those are wonderful examples that you highlighted, and I just wanted to kind of enhance that portion of your example. So, but before I do my closing remarks, I'm going to defer to my elder statesman, out of respect for him, Chief Hoskins.
Absolutely. Well, before we get to him, because your voices will be the last, aside from Reverend Jackson, that we hear, because it is your story. We are not going to do what the majority of populations do, speak for you. You will speak for yourselves. That is why you're here today. Reverend Mark Thompson, in about 60 seconds. Closing thoughts?
Oh, well, again, I would just defer to my native brethren and just say that I am in solidarity with them, and I hope all would be on this day, which is one of the greatest contradictions in American history. We will never be free. None of us will be free until the wrongs are righted that have been done to the native people and that have been done to our people, the African people here in America.
Attorney Darrell Jones, Chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition.
I certainly would underscore what Mr. Thompson, Reverend Thompson, just said, and certainly, it's all about learning everyone's history, moving our nation forward with the full understanding and full participation of everyone. And we cannot have everyone participating if the Native American, whose soil we stood on and stand on, is not in full participation. Now I yield to them.
Indeed. I believe we have Alethea Shapiro, Attorney Alethea Wells Shapiro. Your closing thought? Okay, we have to bring you back up, and we need to unmute. Okay.
Got it?
Very good. Yes,
I
thank you
just
so
wanted
much.
to, I forgot who was just saying it. Was it maybe Mark Thompson?
That was Attorney Darrell Jones.
Until we are all free, none of us, yes, until we are all free, none of us are free. And I just want to thank everyone so much for including me. I've learned so much on this phone call, and I will messages that I learned. And, every day I continue to learn and share the messages that I'm learning, and I'm very grateful for you for including me. So thank you very much.
What an honor it has been to have you here. Attorney Barbara Arnwine, your closing thoughts. And we understand that they're from Lydia Maddox, that there are an estimated 1.2 million unregistered Native voters.
Yes.
And that there is a nativevote.org, the Native American Rights Fund, just released a report. And I promise you, I'm going to reach out to you, Chief Hoskin, and you, Mr. Sickey, to have you on my radio show here in Chicago. We're regionally syndicated as the top progressive talk radio show on the top progressive radio station in the country. We're very blessed to have you. And I'd love for you to come on regularly and tell us how we can be in solidarity with each other and how, Attorney Arnwine, we just don't know.
Right.
There's so much that we don't know, particularly at this critical time, and whenever we vote matters.
And the fact that we don't know is no accident. It's not that this is some kind of negligence. This is purposeful, to keep people ignorant so people don't understand what the true history is and what our need is for reparations, our need is for rights, to overturn the injustices that are embedded into our society. I just want to say one last thing. Everybody, you've been hearing the RNC, the Republican National Committee, the NLA, the Republican National Lawyers Association, all of them talking about they're going to spend $20 million to try to take away our voting rights, the fight in the courts against expanded voting options, all the rest of it. And they've also talked about spending that money on putting former military, former police officers, off-duty police officers at polling sites to challenge voters. Guess where they've done this before? In South Dakota, on Native American lands, where they have really taken these challengers and tried to intimidate Native American voters, in addition to doing this in African American and Latino communities. We are united again, and a need to fight and a need to make sure that that never happens. And that means we got to coordinate, Reverend Jackson, and we got to work hard together to defeat a really nefarious evil and just immoral scheme. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Milan Patton.
Thank you, Ms. Santita. This conversation that we're having again is so important, and the significance of having this conversation on the day, which has historically been one of unequivocal celebration, is profound. The untold story. We've discussed what the lessons are that need to be learned. We need to ask ourselves, how can we incorporate these things and not let them overwhelm us? How can we call on the stories of our fellow brothers and sisters to rejuvenate us, working to hold the media accountable, working to hold the educational system accountable, working to hold corporate America accountable and responsible, working to hold our family accountable and responsible. we must keep marching. And this day is so significant because it shows us that we must embrace ideals of community, empathy, and respect in order to grow. Not ideals of partisanship, factionism, and apathy. We have a far way to go, and we must just keep marching. So I'm so grateful to be a part of this conversation, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to listen.
And we're looking forward to all that you're going to do with the young millennials and those who are younger, Milan, reaching out to our American brothers and sisters who are the Native American brothers and sisters. Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, our Senior Vice President, theologian, pastor, lawyer. You do so many things. Can you give us an overview as we close this out?
Thank you, Santita, for moderating this important first conversation. It lays the foundation for what Reverend Jackson has put before us as the profound convener that he is, an opportunity to establish a relationship between communities that have so much of shared history, but we know so little about one another. I would simply say that this conversation provides inspiration, but the partnership and the solidarity will provide and move us toward transformation. This is the opportunity for us to build upon this conversation. The National Congress of American Indians and Rainbow Push Coalition will be coming out soon with a partnership statement that will talk about where we're going to work together on matters of mutual interest. Voting rights certainly premier amongst them as we are looking to lay out a strategy to be determinative, as Sister Barbara Arnwine has said, in the outcome of the upcoming election. So this is an important first step. It helps us to right the wrong of telling the fairy tale. Happy Independence Day right there, 4th of their lie, as Brother Mark Thompson has said. We've got to fix it. We can't simply revise it. We've got to write a history going forward. Thank you, Chairman Sickey. Thank you, Chief Hoskin. Thank you, Licia Maddox. We look forward to working with you. Thank you, Reverend Jackson, for your brilliance, your genius, your passion, and your vision. And we'll be talking again soon. Thank you.
As following your lead, Mr. Sickey, we go to Chief Hoskin for his closing thought.
Well, thank you very much, Reverend Jackson, and to all the panelists. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this today. I do think solidarity across people who have been marginalized in this country is important. It starts with the very basic and self-evident proposition that there are strength in numbers, and we can look at our numbers and we can use those to undertake important efforts, and they can be efforts relating to economic development, economic justice. It can be strength in numbers to make sure barriers are torn down for voting. It can make sure that we have efforts that are collective to do something about education in this country. It affects African Americans in this country, and it affects Native Americans in this country. Healthcare is always an issue that I think people who live sometimes in the shadows suffer for want of. And we can do something together to strike a blow against those sorts of inequities in this society. They are there, they are real, and there are strength in numbers. But it's more than just a numeric proposition. It's more than just the fact that when we add our numbers together, we can do more at the ballot box and have more influence. We ought to be talking to each other about our stories and learning about our stories, because what I think about more than anything is what young people in this country think about African American communities and what they think about Native American communities. And that's the population that really can transform America. And so we have to undertake something that will help tell the story of, again, Native Americans and African Americans. We can do that together. I think what Milan said earlier in the panel, earlier in the discussion, rather, was something very inspirational to me. And it's very simple. And he just talked about that it was a very hopeful day, that he had a great deal of hope. Well, I believe that's true. I believe that's a true statement on his part. And if that's true across the country, of people of his generation, then I think the rest of us ought to enrich that sense of hope with substance. And that substance is in large measure the untold history of Native Americans, and frankly, the untold history of African Americans in this country. We ought to do it. We ought to do it together. And I'm just blessed to be a part of it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Sickey. And I take note of the American flag behind you and your nation's flag behind you.
Thank you for that observation. And I do, as we are, I mean, it's important that we celebrate all of diversity. We're all Americans here this morning and in moving forward. And as you see, as you noted, the proud flag of our tribal nation is represented behind me, which features a primitive garfish. But as you know, the garfish is a very resilient fish that has survived centuries since the time of the dinosaurs. So, but it also, in my culture, it represents and signifies courage and discipline, something that is much needed in our country today. But in closing, I want to this has been just a fantastic discussion that, again, enriches all of our lives, not just African Americans, not just Native Americans, but it enriches all American citizens here in this country. And I would just like to suggest that we make this an annual forum, perhaps. Or maybe we can reconvene this panel once again during National Native American History Month, perhaps. I would like to make that suggestion. But in addition to that, our forum, but I would like to encourage other organizations and entities around the country to do the same. Organize opportunities for discussion where we can put everything on the table, whether it's pleasant or awkward or otherwise. Let's have these discussions. And we obviously, as human beings, we will agree. And as human beings, sometimes we disagree. But I want to urge everyone, if we do disagree, let's agree agreeably. I think we will go further as a people and as a country when we have these constructive civil dialogues and exchanges. And if you noted, I did note earlier on June 27th, 1973, is when the Cushatas regained its federal re-recognition after decades of hardship and poverty. And at the time of federal re-recognition, my father, Ernest Sickey, was interviewed by the American Indian Affairs Association, which is still around. And during that time of re-recognition, he said, I'll end with his quote. He said, "The tribe has worked long and hard for this. The struggle has made us stronger, and our victory will open the way to justice and a better life." And that statement, I don't know if Ernest at the time realized how profound that statement would be and the significant impact that June 27, 1973 had on an entire region of Southwest Louisiana 47 years later after federal re-recognition took place. We're not only, as the tribal chairman of the Cushata tribe of Louisiana, today it's a huge honor and a privilege to serve in this role, but at the same time, I'm reminded of the fact that we're not only addressing the needs of 966 members of my own tribal people, but the policies and the ordinances and the laws that we adopt as a sovereign nation here in Allen Parish impact non-Indian lives as well. So the modern day tribal government has an immense responsibility to practice good governance, good, sound, stable governance, because many lives are dependent upon the success of the Cushatas. In the wake of the Cushata success story, or my people, and the beneficiaries are non-Indian people as well. You cannot draft a better story than that. And again, our wonderful stories of our stories of challenges and oppression must be balanced out with discussions of progress and achievements that we have made as a people and as a country. And with that mindset, with that type of view, I think that together we will find our way to a better life, the life that America promises for all her citizens. Thank you all so much, and I hope to see you all again. And I extend to everyone here, and also to all of those that joined us live, a personal invitation to visit us here at Cushata. God bless you all, and Alila Mo.
Bless you. Reverend Jackson, would you like to close this out?
Yes, and there's a book, Keeping Hope Alive, collection of some of my speeches and sermons. Here's about Dr. Grace and Kim. We'll all be get a copy of this book. I'll send those on the Zoom copy for today. Let me say that, Brother said, Austin said the common number, common linkage. Not just the numbers, the link. And the moral, the moral authority. For example, Santita. In 1965, America.
Okay, just one moment, please. We're getting, one moment, Reverend. We're getting a lot of feedback from you. I don't know what that is. Okay, Reverend, please proceed, and I need you to speak, lean in so that we can understand. We need to hear you, Reverend Jackson. We can't hear you.
Evolves. My great-great-grandma was not a slave. She was my great-great-grandmother, not a slave. So slaves and savages, that language must leave. No savages, no slaves, really. People were enslaved. The second piece of that, it seems to me, is that linkage. In 65, they formed a treaty with African Americans, a treaty. But it was never for African Americans on the blacks couldn't vote for 85 years. White women couldn't serve in the South to 67. 18-year-olds could not vote. Could go on college campus, could not, the Indians recognition that vote 73. Latinos in 75. So in that same period of time, we all gained the right to vote. We're the new majority. So in the future, if you have to drive about 3 hours to vote, it's all of us. Because when Kennedy won by 113,000 votes, your million votes count. Bush took the election from Gore by 527 votes. A million vote count. Your linkage is important. The numbers are important, and your moral authority is most important. This will not be an evidence. We're going to have this country a lot. We must really get some influence the people, members from Congress and others who are not a part of this country. They must learn this conversation. Some mayors and some sheriffs and some police chiefs, black Congress people. We must go out of our way to really have this a much broader, bigger conversation soon. I think truth depends upon it. And in a time of Black Lives Matter and people of color matter, none matters more than the original peoples of our country. Cynthia, thank you for being my daughter and being both the producer today. Dr. Todd and Shirley Davis, a big shout out to Shirley producer Shirley.
Pulling all of this together. And Reverend Jackson, I want to ask everyone, as we ask them to get your book, and that's a collection of some of your speeches. I can't wait so that we can hear straight from the heart, so we can hear many of your speeches from the 70s and the 80s. There's several things that come to mind. I remember when you were running for president, you were launching your bid in 1983. I think you were doing Meet the Press. And Chief Hoskin and Mississippi, Reverend Jackson, my father was asked a question that was very insulting at that moment. One of the Calv brothers, we would remember him, Attorney Jones and Reverend Dr. Yeary and Barbara Harwine and Reverend Thompson growing up. They were two prominent voices in journalism. I forget which brother it was. It was either Bernard or Mount Marvin, who asked Reverend Jackson, "Are you Black American first?" And so I made note of your flags behind you, Mr. Sickey. You're not American. You are American and you are Native American. You're both. There's so many things coming from so many places, but you come from here. And we honor that. And we thank you for being with us today and giving us that lesson and showing us those flags. You take me back to my great-grandmother, now her stories about the Native American in our family. And it's a substantial history because my father's from this part of North Carolina. In South Carolina, you have the Low Country, which is where you have the plantations. Where he's from is where you had a real mixture of Africans, Native Americans, and Europeans, and they became a new people called the Melungeon people, which is really what he is. But you have to know those stories. You have to know that history. These are things that we have. Mr. Jones, Attorney Jones, we put them in the inner recesses of our minds as we've been fighting a black-white struggle, and we have not known that the struggle is so much bigger than that, right?
Hoskin, North Carolina today, Hoskin, North Carolina. Really,
Well, you know, and your father is one of the first African Americans buried in his family plot because everybody else there is Native American. So we have a shared history, and we have a shared, not just shared blood, but a shared experience. And we thank you for sharing with us today, Chief Hoskin and Mr. Sicky. Your history, our history, flags. Thank you so much for that. And, you know, and I leave you today asking you to support the Rainbow Coalition because we need your help. 773-FREEDOM. 773-FREEDOM is our number, rainbowpush.org. You can find out what we're doing. Every week we encourage you to like and share this Facebook broadcast. We want people to hear the untold story. We want you to know that the Native American has only been a citizen for 96 years. Let that settle in on you. Let us think about Langston Hughes today. I think that you would appreciate this more, almost being so lyrical yourself. Reverend Thompson and Reverend Dr. Yeary, so brilliant you both are. Let us close with these 5 lines from the great bard, Black Bard of Harlem. Oh, America was never America to me. Oh, yes, I say it plain. America was never America to me. And yet, I swear on this oath that America will be. And I thank you all for being part of this conversation today because indeed, America is coming into being. Truly, we are going to make America great. We're going to make it there. We're going to get there. We're going to get there together. That's the only way. God
Reverend,
bless you, everybody. Reverend Jackson.
this is in prayer. Reverend Yeary, please.
God, for this time together where you've convened family from near and far, we are humbled and grateful as we are reminded of the names and the presence of those who are now in the realm of the invisible. We are reminded that we are not alone. For the vision and the voice of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr. to ask the family to gather on this day, we are grateful. Now, God, we leave this conversation responsible. We have an obligation not to just talk the talk, but to walk the walk and to walk it together. And so help us to link arms virtually while we're physically distancing. We are still socially and politically linked. Help us to do the work that brings us to that place of justice that America will indeed be. Keep us now connected. Keep us focused. Keep us mindful that we are not just connected, but we're responsible as we do thy work and do thy will. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you, everybody. And may you have a blessed Independence Day and go and tell the untold story today. This conversation about racial equity that we've had with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. God bless you, everybody. Happy 4th of July.
Love you guys. Thank you, Sam.